I'm in an industry that is renowned for exploitation, but I think what I've learned from life and my story with God is that it's not my job to know the end point. It's my job to take the first step and get moving down this road.
Welcome everybody, this is Simon Gilbo with Inspired, and I'm very excited this week to have Antoinette Daniel with us. Antoinette and I go back, I think it's 11 years to All Nations. We met All Nations, didn't we? Welcome, Antoinette.
Hi everyone.
So to give a bit of an introduction on Antoinette, she's the founder of a company called Just Helpers, which is an ethical London-based cleaning agency specialising in providing cleaning and concierge services for executive homes like the Bishop of London and the Rothschild family. And she's been featured, I was thrilled to see this, in the Metro and Good Housekeeping magazine. So justice and empowerment's at the heart of what you do, isn't it, Antoinette? And this year, your mission has been to challenge the pay and economic structures of the cleaning industry. Small vision, I love that. So that every client in the UK can have a clean home and a clean conscience. I love the way you put that. Alternatively, we could talk about you as you're a former PE teacher, but now you're an entrepreneur with a passionate about justice in general being done, particularly in the areas of what we just addressed. And at the moment, you're in the process of radically transforming the cleaning industry to enable cleaning colleagues to be paid equitably, working rights and conditions to be more rigorously monitored, laws changed to enable ethical agencies to operate more ably, and clients' homes and offices clean to a consistently high standard. And in your spare time, you just love walking by the sea and sitting in your favorite chair, watching the world go by. So that gives people a bit of a picture of you. And before we get into the interview, I just want to share with people how you first impacted me. So we were having visa issues, trying to move to the States for a couple of years. And I was just invited briefly to join the staff of All Nations Christian College. And Antoinette was one of the students. And she shared this story when she spoke. And I want to share it now. It's just as a warning. It's quite sort of powerful, and it doesn't mince words. So just if you're sensitive, you might to just sort of switch off for the next 45 seconds. But this story totally impacted me, and we'll come to it in your interview as to what you're about. So listen up. Antoinette said this, and so I'm relaying it to you. This is from 11 years ago. Let me tell you a story, a true story. Eleanor was 28 when the factory where she worked closed down. Unemployed and desperate for money, she answered an advertisement in a local newspaper for au pair work in London. She met with her recruiter, who helped her fill in some forms and told her that a visa would be arranged for her. She was also asked to pay a €700 deposit up front before travelling, which she did with support from her family. And Eleanor, who believed she was travelling legally, handed her passport over to her Moldovan trafficker at the start of the journey. Together they travelled overland by car, coach and plane to England, but via Prague, Spain, Germany, France and Dublin. And Eleanor realised she was travelling illegally when the traffickers gave her an Italian passport to use between France and Spain. When she arrived in London, Eleanor was told she owed her traffickers £30,000 in travel costs, and she would have to work as a prostitute to pay them back. She was taken to a brothel where she spent 4 months working 7 days a week, having sex with up to 20 men a day in 3 different flats. She is allowed £15 per day for food, cigarettes and condoms, so she had to choose between her health or her sanity. She was told she'd pay off her debt much more quickly if she gave special services, including having sex without a condom. She was locked in and only allowed out for work and was permitted no contact with other women. Eleanor was too afraid to say anything about her situation to the men who had sex with her, or even to the police who visited the flat once, as her traffickers had threatened to harm her family if she did. Eventually, she managed to escape by jumping out of a second-floor window after being locked in the flat alone one day. Eleanor now suffers constant back pain from the injuries she sustained during her escape and is afraid to go out alone. So you read that, Antoinette, 11 years ago. I wept as you read that. And I wept obviously because it was a powerful story, which I've then used aplenty. But I think nowadays there's various groups, aren't there, like IJM, and I'm going to miss some out. So you've got to Stop the Traffic. Which other groups are doing it?
Oh, there's A21, which has come out of HDB. Lots of community groups now, which is really, really gratifying to hear. Yes.
But 11 years ago, I mean, that was, it was vaguely new to me. I mean, interesting enough, we're involved in sex workers in Burundi as well, getting them into new careers. But it struck me so hard. And it also struck me because you are just a brilliant communicator. So I don't want to overinflate your ego, but it was, you expressed and then went on so powerfully. And I remember thinking, wow, this woman is going to be massively used of God. She's got a huge heart of compassion. And anyway, listen, this interview is meant to be you, not me. So I'm going to stop there. So let's just start earlier in your life so that people get a context of what has shaped you. Let's go back to when you're 14, you decided to be a PE teacher. What was the sort of impetus for that decision?
Actually, I can clearly and vividly remember where I was. I was sat in class number 4, Streatham High School, little mezzanine class. So it'd have been a third year at that time. And I just remember having a flashing light of revelation that I wanted to be a teacher, and specifically I wanted to be a PE teacher. Rewind a little, I was a looked after child. My mum had suffered from schizophrenia, and that had coloured my childhood. I think for a lot of people that live an interesting childhood, that's your norm. So my norm was living with mental health. But eventually, around the age of 7, my mum had a massive episode and decided to terminate our lives. And she put us to sleep, set the flat on fire. And honestly, by God's grace, I actually don't know what happened to this day, but I just remember being shaken awake and running through a wall of fire. Wow. And I was put into care after that, age 7. I actually had a wonderful time in care, and my story is a really positive one. And strangely, those were the days where your key workers could take you home for the weekend. So slightly bizarre, but it worked for me. My key worker was a wonderful, warm Black woman, embedded in her Pentecostal church. So I had pockets of normality all the way through being in children's homes, where Sundays would be putting on a hat, going and being in church all day, hanging out with her kids, and then coming back to the children's home to resume my week. And then I was fostered into a family whose children were identified as gifted and talented. So that had been one of the concerns of my local county council, that they had identified me as gifted and talented. I mean, that's all dribbled away now, Simon, honestly. but they were really keen to place me with a family that would give me aspirational goals. Nobody in my circle, I lived on a council estate in Battersea. University wasn't a norm for me. Hanging out, causing a bit of a ruckus during the day was what I knew. So that was really transformational for me, to be in a family of only women, so single parented, 2 older sisters, all very smart, all very sassy, and then ending up in a private school, courtesy of my local borough, all bizarre, and just being in this really small school in a 2-form entry of about 20 kids in each class, and thriving. School was a really safe place for me. So my foster care family was a little bit abusive. There was a real Cinderella story that overarched that. But coming to school, I could reinvent myself at 8:30 every day. And I was able to thrive across the curriculum, but particularly in PE. I had a knack for netball. So my PE teacher was my hero, really. And she really looked out for me. I see that now as a teacher myself. I see the extra mile that many of my teachers went for me, probably knowing what was going on in the background. But my PE teacher took me to trials, got kit sponsored for me when I qualified for county netball. Just was always a constant there, always looking out. I even remember her offering to pay for a set of school photos because clearly I couldn't afford to take them home. And I've got really charming stories of my head teacher pulling me into her office and saying, a woman should always have a secret stash of money. And she opened a bank account for me with just a little bit of money and said, you've got to adopt this habit of saving, and you've always got to have a little stash that you can go back to that nobody knows about. So some really beautiful stories of teaching for me. And actually the last school I ended up at in terms of teaching was that school. And that's actually what I thought I'd retire doing. So PE till I die was my mantra from the age of 14. And that didn't quite work out, but it's certainly been a glorious ride until God had other plans.
So did you go and study PE at university?
Yeah, I went to Bedford College, as it was then, back in the days of colleges and polytechnics, and studied sports science and business studies. I should have studied business studies mainly, and I see now why God wanted me to be a business studies major. I flunked my RSA level, so instead of getting an A, I got a B, and that knocked me out of Loughborough and into a college that I hadn't even visited. So the first time I saw it, I rocked up on my bike from the station to register for my first day. But it was wonderful. It was exactly where I needed to be, a smaller college, passionate people for PE, and slightly interesting administration. So I was just able to redefine my degree from a business major to a sports science major, and had a wonderful 3 years at Bedford College.
And you talk about that time as being where you understood that God hears prayers. What did you mean by that?
Yes. So I was quite a new Christian when I came to Bedford. And it was the first time that I really had to make the decision to stand up and be counted. So, I could either drift into the parties of all the sports clubs or just take a stand for God. And I was really fortunate, actually, that I was placed in a prayer triplet with two guys, Ross and Matt. Still remember them fondly today. And we kind of covered the whole spectrum of Christendom at that point. Mm-hmm. So from a guy that was right out charismatic, prophesying and speaking in tongues, to me, conservative Baptist lady, FIEC certified, never really ever heard of anyone speaking in tongues. And God just mushed the three of us together. And in the end, we became the next CU exec. And at that time, Bedford were trying to shut down two societies, both of which I was secretary, so the Christian Union and the Black Society. And they'd written petitions, they'd got stands, the student union were unresponsive, uncaring. I remember standing in this big AGM for the college, pretty much all the students there. It felt like being in the lion's den with this big vote going on. And I think we were sort of a ramshackle CU of about 12 people at that point, and having to argue our case for why Christian Union should be allowed and should be funded like every other society. So we won that. And in the end, after our 2 years, we were on the exec for a year, but 2 years later, after when we left, our CU was one of the biggest societies in the uni. We had a thriving membership of people. We put on wide-scale events across the town, within the university itself. It was just an amazing, eye-opening time. But I remember right at the beginning, sitting in Matt's living room, praying our hearts out, because we just didn't have the funds to go to the CU training weekend. I can't remember, the universities together training weekend. And we needed £500 to go, which was a massive sum of money for us. We were all broke. So we prayed and we prayed and we prayed. And then on the way to get the pizza from the oven, Matt noticed an envelope of money on the doorstep, and it was £500.
Oh, I love those. So goosebump moment. I love it.
Yeah. For me, that was incredible. Like, you mean you pray and God listens? Yeah. Things happen. So that actually was the beginning of me understanding that there's a living God there that wants to hear our everyday things, that is kingdom-minded, that is active and moves ahead of his people, when they put their heart and their lives on the line. And that's been something that I come back to time and time again.
So was it plain sailing? Were you on the straight and narrow all the way?
Oh, no. I wish I could say I was. Uni was good years, and I left uni, and I had a real down dip. I threw myself into work as a teacher. I was working 7 days a week, child contact time at one point, with tourneys and matches and weekend fixtures. And burnout was fast approaching. I was a little bit cross with God, to put it mildly, that I was still single in my mid-20s, and kind of took matters into my own hand and started a round of online dating and all the weird and wonderful things that go on there. And I went off the rails dramatically. I can't even talk about it. People will be watching this during daytime. So needless to say, my mum and I had a very open relationship. There's still stuff that she doesn't know about that time. I ended up running away a little bit to Kenya for 2 years, ostensibly to teach in an international school. I think there is still a swathe of people that think I went to do good works in some remote village. But no, I was living it up in an international school, in an expat community, having a whale of a time. And I kind of lived that lifestyle for around 5 years. I eventually came back to the UK, started to pick up the pieces of my life. And I just had this overwhelming 24 hours one Saturday night where God hounded me. And he was just like, tomorrow, you need to go to church. And it was just this itchy feeling. I couldn't sleep. I hadn't really prayed or engaged with God or church for a few years, on and off spottily, but nothing significant. And so I just wrestling with God all night long, so much so that I wrote a list. I'm like, okay, I'll pacify God by writing a list of 10 churches that I could maybe go and visit tomorrow. And there'd been one that I'd been toying with. So I rocked up there finally. And it's like, in fact, I had no intention of going, except I got up to go to the loo and just found myself putting on party clothes from the night before that were airing out on the banister, all smoky. And there I was in my car driving to this church. Got there and that church was shut. They were having a shared service with another church down the road. So I thought, what are the chances of this? I thought, okay, I know that church, I'll go there. Couldn't find it. But on the way, saw another church, and this was on the Brighton Road in Purley. So I just remember these huge brown doors, and I just couldn't figure out the way in. Then I tried another church that also had a shared meeting with someone else, and I really had no idea where that was. And I just thought, I've done my bit. I've done my bit, Lord. I am going home. But to get home, I had to go round a one-way system. And I noticed this church that I'd never noticed before, Purley Baptist Church. And I could see that there was a service, the doors were open, and I just kind of screeched into the car park and went in. Because it was an evening service, and I was thinking, I'm going to be super late by now. I'm driving around for an hour. But their service started pretty much an hour later than everybody else. And they were having a healing service. And again, I just thought, oh, this is a bit woo-woo. I'm not sure here. So I actually stood up, and they weren't quite ready. So I was actually early. And then I just thought, I don't think I want to do this. Stood up, tried to get out. Well, I'd been one of the first few into the car park, and I couldn't get out. I was blocked in. So I sat through this service, and it was incredible. It was incredible, and it was just what I needed to hear. I went up for prayer and pretty much haven't looked back since then. So Purley Baptist became the place where God really tackled with my sin. I mean, on that night, I confessed everything to this poor chap that must have thought, oh my goodness. But yeah, amazing for me. And that kind of paved the way really to me ending up at All Nations.
Am I right that you sort of had a sense of calling to get engaged in the human trafficking industry, but you were like resistant to that, sort of Jonah type, fleeing from it?
Yeah, so here's where you get the theme of my life. A little bit hard of hearing, a little bit resistant to change. So Purley was a real defining time in my life. It was the first church where I'd got young people of my age, where I was thriving spiritually. I'd found a prayer triplet that just spoke my language, 3 godly, strong women, loving the preaching, growing every day, got stuck into youth work. I literally just renovated. I bought a house, renovated it. I got a car that actually worked. I was in a job that I loved. My life was going in the right direction. I was on track for being a deputy head in 5 to 7 years' time. Everything was working for the first time in about a decade. So I was really comfortable there. And I remember one Sunday, we had a preacher, a white middle-aged guy, rock up and say that today he was going to talk about slavery. And I just remember sitting there rather arrogantly in the congregation thinking, what is this white middle-aged guy going to teach me about slavery? I'm Black, by the way, for listeners out there. So it was a little bit arrogant, and I always gathered myself together and did a little bit of a head waggle. Well, that white middle-aged guy was Steve Chalk, and he had every right to talk to me about slavery. And what he very cleverly did was talk about the transatlantic slave trade, and definitely, didn't demean it in any way. And that's something that a lot of us know a lot about. But then he said this one defining line, which started my journey, which was that in the 400 years of transatlantic slave trade, all of the many millions of people that were shipped around the Golden Triangle, that didn't equal the number of people enslaved today or that day around the world. And that just blew my mind. I actually thought, this guy is lying. So I went away just to try and prove that fact wrong. I just thought, this can't be right. That's a shocking number of people. And at that time, the numbers were 27 million people trafficked, enslaved, engaged in modern day slavery around the world in one day. And so I just started to read and read and read. And from a subject that I'd never heard, suddenly it was all around me. It was in every other service. It was on the news. I was sitting in assembly doing my fierce Miss Daniel look. And then the form that we're doing assembly that day would be talking to us about modern day slavery. So it was surrounding me month after month. And I remember thinking, this is awful. You know, someone's got to do something about this, but clearly not me, because I'm doing my thing. Like, I'm doing the young people. I'm good at that. Maybe it should be you, Mr. Policeman, in my church community. Maybe it should be you, Miss Social Worker, in my church community. You know, and so I'd go and have a little chat. Have you considered getting involved in any way? No. And after about 18 months of this, like to the point where I'd started to keep a journal about it because it was that frequent, I realised, I'm the common denominator. In all these places that I'm going, I'm the common denominator. I wonder if God's trying to talk to me. So I resisted again for another 6 months, but it's uncomfortable then. I don't know if you've ever had that when God is asking you to do something and you've just got this sort of sense of bowed head and bowed shoulders. So I had this genius brainwave that I would pretend to be a little bit holy. I'd fast for a week, but I'd do it at a conference. So I'd go to Spring Harvest and pray and fast and be surrounded by God's people and clearly be seeking God's will on all of this. But really what I went to do was hide. So I didn't tell anyone from my church. I literally figured out where my church were on the map. Thank God for Spring Harvest being so big in those days, and booked myself a room right at the other end of campus. I literally skulked around for 5 days. I decided that I would only attend the morning and evening meetings so that I could pray and fast in the day and focus my mind. And that worked. That worked until the penultimate night, where in the evening meeting, there were thousands of people in this hall. And they stood up and they said, basically that tonight's meeting would be all about modern day slavery. And my soul just shriveled. Like, really? Okay, that's fine. And so I had a journal full of songs, Bible verses, thoughts, charities that were gripping my heart. India was a big thing at that point, and it was all there. Everything, every song, every Bible passage, the specific charity that God was kind of narrowing my gaze to. A representative from there stood up and talked, and I was still resistant. It's like, I'm okay, a few tears, but I'm okay. Final song sung, everybody sat down and heaved a sigh of relief and thought, I've managed it, I've escaped God. Band packing up. And then the speaker just sort of came back on stage and said, I'm really sorry, but actually I don't think God's done. I think that there are people here that are trying to run away from what God is asking them to do. There are people here who've maybe, are saying to God, but I've just renovated my house, or I've just found the perfect church, or, I'm on track for my best promotion. I'm just like, how has God found me here? And so they did an altar call, and I went up, got prayed for. And the person who prayed for me very wisely said that I probably needed some mission training. I mean, these are just all ludicrous phrases to me at that point. So to be a missionary, for me, you had to be super holy, super sorted, super anointed, have walked on water through your church for the last 2 decades. Not me, not this sort of crippled Christian that had was trying to patch her life back together and walk in God's way. But I went to talk to someone in the employability section the next day, and they gave me 2 booklets, one for Redcliffe, one for All Nations, and said these are the best colleges that they know about, that they suggest I at least go and have an open day and see. And so things happened quite quickly from there. It's like God was like, finally, I've got her attention, fast forward. So I think within 2 months, both had an open day. I decided on Redcliffe already because it did a year's course and I could be out there on the field. I realised by then, okay, I'm willing to go to India. God's broken me down. I will go anywhere. You're telling me India, I will go. I put my house on the market and I kind of was all set. So did the day at Redcliffe. I'm like, yeah, love it. This will do. It's a long year. I can do it. I really don't want to do 2 years. I just want to get up and get on with this. Got to the bottom of the driveway at All Nations, had not even seen the building at that point. And I just knew, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the place. I wonder if I can bargain with them to do all the modules that I want to do in 1 year. And by the end of that open day, I just knew I belong here, I'm supposed to be here. And God was totally right. I mean, after all, that's where I met you guys, right?
Yes, well, I'm so glad that you chose, or God chose All Nations for you, because then we get the chance to have you in our lives. So, All Nations, was that plain sailing?
All Nations is a wonderful place. And for anyone that's considering any sort of cross-cultural work mission, I'd strongly advocate a stint there. You don't have to do 2 years like I did. I just needed to. It's a place full of people that are on fire for God. It's a place where unhelpful belief systems get deconstructed, tested, challenged. It's an international community where you suddenly get to realise that Western theology is not the only theology that exists out there, and where the Bible just gets distilled down to its purest concept. So really great for me, really great to not be a weirdo anymore and just be in a community of believers that were all thinking in a similar way. Lots of tears. I mean, I think that's why I needed 2 years. The first year just to kind of de-teacherize and really come to grips with who I was before God. Also in that time, my mum had quite a serious episode of schizophrenia, and I kind of really had to understand, how do I manage my mum's illness as well as managing the things that God was asking me to do and not get into burnout stage, which is what had happened before. So lots of learning time, but again, lots of wonderful and inspirational people that regularly come through All Nations, such as the Gilbo family.
Hi, folks. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you are, it'd be great if you shared it with as many of your mates as possible so that other people get to hear about it. And listen, if you would like to support our work in Burundi, which is the hungriest country in the world, I'd love support there too. You can do that by going to greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. Now let's get back to the podcast. So you finish All Nations and then you announce to your middle-class friends that you're going to become a cleaner.
Yes.
So tell us about that.
So towards the end, and all the way through All Nations, I'd known that campaigning against human trafficking was the thing that God was asking me to do. I ended up interning for an international organisation called International Justice Mission, IJM, and had finished a stint with them, had then managed to land a part-time paid job with a Salvation Army church to raise the profile of human trafficking within a London borough. So had committed to that. But for about 3 months, I was unemployed. So I just moved back to London and I was unemployed. And the local Jehovah's Witnesses had clearly got wind that there was someone at home lurking behind the curtains. So I eventually opened the door and had this wonderful debate, 3-month-long debate with a series of ever more senior Jehovah's Witness people, but one lady that was a constant. And we became good friends at that time as we just opened various books, the Bible, their version of the Bible, and debated. And after a while, I just said to her, how is it that you can financially survive on the streets? Because her commitment to door knocking was huge. And I knew that she'd got a lovely flat that she clearly had a mortgage on. And she had a part-time job, but she said she also did a bit of cleaning on the side. And I just had a little light bulb moment. It tied together random threads of my life. So kind of going right back to my foster care experience, one of my jobs was to be up between 5 and 6 every morning, hand sweeping our house, hand washing clothes. So I'd really learned to clean the hard way. And it had been a gift that I'd offered to friends and family all the way through my teenage years for housing me or looking after me or caring for me. It had been something that I'd been in charge of at All Nations and eventually housekeeper for All Nations for a stint, managing a listed building. So I knew a lot about cleaning by the time we had this conversation. I just didn't know that I knew that much. And I just thought, well, I've got this part-time charity job that is about a third of my teacher's salary. I'm back in London. I can't afford to breathe, let alone rent a place by myself. I wonder if I could clean on the side. And so I just thought, yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. I'd run out of my house savings by then. I think I was down to my last couple of £100. And so I had to go and sign on at the job centre for a month. That was just a soul-destroying experience, but also quite illuminating. And in that month of signing on, as well as talking to my Jehovah's Witness friend, I realised that I could maybe start some cleaning on the side, and that there would be a scheme through the job centre that might help me turn it into a business. Now, I never fancied myself as a business person. Let's go backwards to remembering where I eased the business studies out of my degree and increased the sports. I'd never seen myself in that role, and still some days, and quite amazed that we still keep going. And so I thought, yes, that's what I'm going to do. And I remember being at a dinner party, canapes and mulled wine, and lots of my middle-class friends around, and people that had been praying for work for me for those few months. And somebody just sort of said, oh, any joy with the job hunt? So I reportedly said, yes, I've been accepted for the charity job, but I've also decided to clean. And it was just like, if you can imagine one of those Westerns where the music stops and the doors just vibrate. That's what it felt like.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, yes, that probably isn't great, is it? But it made perfect sense to me. But in that moment, there was a missionary from London City Mission there, a real down-to-earth sort of the earth guy. And he said, it's funny you should say that, but my next door neighbour knocked on my door last night and asked if I knew anyone at church that could clean. And so her name was Eve, quite appropriately, and she was my first ever client. Eve was amazing. Eve, literally, within 10 minutes of meeting her, handed over her keys and said, I'm disappearing for 2 weeks to my parents. I just need you to sort my flat out. I mean, Eve had pants in her kitchen cupboards. That's I call it the theory of shovage, where people had clearly just been coming up to her door and she'd just been shoving things into every nook and cranny. So Eve was my first client, and the business very quickly grew from there.
And am I right that there's plenty of room for real abuse in that line of work?
Yes. And so this has been one of the current mysteries that I'm wrestling with. So having sold a house, changed lives, to go and immerse myself in the world of anti-human trafficking, after 3 years of juggling small charity that was growing rapidly, a cleaning business that was growing rapidly, and I was doing some coaching at the time as well, I was overwhelmed again. And I just said to God, something's got to give. And I thought, well, clearly it's going to be the cleaning and the coaching, because, I've given up everything to do this anti-trafficking stuff. I remember putting my head on the desk and crying, actually wailing at work at the charity desk, and just saying, I need help. I need help with one of these things. I need help to decide what to get rid of, and I need help to make the other thing go well. And I got a cold call from a business coach. I think I was his first ever lead that went anywhere, very nervously talking me through his sales pipeline, asking me this list of questions about business acumen, saying, do you know this? No. Do you know this? No. Do you need help with it? Yes. So 40 questions later, I was convinced I need help with this business. But then he gave me his price. And I'm like, I actually don't have the body parts to pay for that. And it was just a really defining moment, because I think I had to sit down and realise I've asked for help. This is the only help that's come. It's costing me the last of any savings I've got. Why is God sending me help for this and not the charity? Very quickly, the charity then revealed that funding for them was drying up, and coaching kind of presented, and all they wanted me full-time or not at all. So within a month of that, I realised, my goodness, I think God is trying to grow the business. But when I really sat down and reflected, I started to think about all of the stories of all of the women that were coming my way. So the first story is that for my initial 2 ladies, they hadn't been paid for months. They hadn't been paid. And that's a really common story. Particularly ladies that just don't get paid. So somebody will invite them over usually from Eastern Europe, to come and work. They live, and with that person, they get driven to jobs, but they're not paid. And, I don't know how I'd managed to divorce the facts, but actually that's trafficking. It's coercion. They're being told that because of the accommodation that they're being given, because of the petrol that's being used to drive them to their jobs, that they're in debt to this person. And so, they're in bonded labour, dressed up very nicely, but very hard for them to step out of that spiral, and even the rate that they're on, below minimum wage. So that's been a common story that we hear even until today, where with some of the biggest cleaning agencies as well, so it makes my blood boil. actually, please don't get me on that soapbox today, tales of sexual abuse. So shifts for sex, basically, or sexual favours. And again, starting on a very small scale, but escalating. And again, vulnerable women who are perhaps single parenting or here alone, trying to send money back to their families abroad. And so, again, I realised that this is my opportunity to create a safe space where anyone with the job title of cleaner was treated with dignity, was paid fairly, on time, not messed around, often to the to the expense of us as a company, as managers, but nothing ever messes around with their finances because really their recourse to other funds is very limited.
So, Antoinette, you've got a big vision to sort of reform and clean up the industry. I like it how you talked about you want every client in the UK to have a clean home and a clean conscience. I mean, that's massive. How are you going to go about that?
I don't know. It's the short answer. But I think what I've learned from life and my story with God is that it's not my job to know the end point. It's my job to take the first step and get moving down this road. So I'm in an industry that is renowned for exploitation, that's renowned for fat cats that sit at the top of multi-million pound businesses while the people that are actually doing the work are completely shafted. And that's just not good enough, particularly in big cities like London, where the cost of living is so high. I have had colleagues, when they've come to us, that live in shared houses of 10 to 20 people who are bed sharing, so I go to work during the day and I'll have the bed, you go to work during the night, and they're swapping beds like this. I mean, that's just a ridiculous way to be in a modern economy. I know now, and I'm currently even on a course with a very large company that boasts about having revenues of nearly £60 million a year. And yet I know that many of the colleagues that come to us come from their franchises, having reported that they haven't been paid for a while, or that they turn up to clients' homes that have been unvetted, where they're being expected to do the impossible in 1 or 2 hours worth of cleaning because of this sort of online way of booking helpers and making up your own quote, clients deciding that it'll only take 1.5 hours to clean my 5-bedroom house. Just ridiculous. So things like that really make my blood boil. I don't think it's right. I mean, I think that business should be a win-win-win where everyone in that chain is thriving, where the company thrives, where the clients thrive, most importantly, where the workers thrive. And because of the way that the cleaning industry is set up, where it's unregulated, you've got, and even we have fallen into this trap, where you've got the agency who can charge a client a fee. A lot of companies then will kind of divorce themselves slightly from the cleaner and say, whatever you pay the cleaner is between you and the cleaner. So that's open to interpretation and abuse right there. And again, clients forget to pay the cleaner or downpay the cleaner or ask for more. But the cleaner the agency just isn't representing the cleaner very well. So, they've kind of got this don't care attitude or can't be reached attitude. And the whole thing is a mess because it's such a low margin industry, literally from the tax system right down to employment law, all needs to be overhauled for all the industries that sit in that bracket. So my big dream is that industries like cleaning, probably like restaurant, like plumbing, all those kind of trade and service industries need to sit in lower VAT brackets. I actually think that there would be more money in the coffers if that happened, just that one thing happened. And so that's one of the things that I need to research and prove and then present to the government. If you put us in a lower category, I think that more people would regulate themselves, pay their taxes and pay their people. We need an employment contract that sits somewhere between the gig economy and full employment. And that doesn't quite exist right now. So because that doesn't exist, agencies are putting people on 0 hours contracts or self-employed contracts, which means that all of the risk is with the workers. But again, the challenge is because companies are paid by the hour and by the client. If those clients aren't in the tank, or if those clients aren't paying, then actually they've got no funds to pay their helpers. So I get it. And it's one of the challenges that we face, but there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way of everybody being secure within that relationship.
Absolutely.
So needing to find and research, what does that look like? And how can we use that to impact the industry for good? And then the final piece of the puzzle is just this disabused notion that, getting a cleaner for £10 is a great thing, particularly if it's through an agency. So if you're one-on-one, absolutely, like go with the London living wage, that's or the living wage. That's a really great marker of what you could and should be paying anyone that works through you. Understand your supply chain, even if it's just your nanny, your cleaner, your gardener. Understand how they're being paid and what they're being paid. But if they're going through an agency and your agency is charging you £10 or £12, do the maths. Like, what is your helper getting at the end of that chain?
Yeah.
So it just needs to be an embarrassing conversation where you're boasting at your dinner table that you only pay £10 for your cleaner. No. And so I kind of want to set a marker for people to really easily understand that if I employ my cleaner directly, then this is what I should be paying roughly. And if I employ through an agency, then this is what I should be paying. And that this is the real cost of ethical cleaning.
Yeah.
So those are the three things that I'm trying to puzzle my way through. And I often have this, what does a PE teacher from Battersea know? So I kind of move my way around that circle. But what I do know is that I know God, and God knows the answer, and God's Spirit is in me.
Amen.
And that's all I need to know.
Amen. Now. Preach it. Oh, we did a film a while back. We called it Screaming Injustice. And I started off with a line, I think God wants us to get angry. And, obviously anger can be, or the outworking of anger can be, smacking someone in the face. That's not the best use of channeling of the anger. But the Bible doesn't say don't be angry. It says be angry and don't sin, or in your anger don't sin. And Jesus clearly got angry when he saw the misuse of his Father's house. And I love it that you have got angry at the injustice in society, and you're doing something about it. And what I love on these podcasts is we're just getting every walk of life represented, from gladiators to bankers to cleaners, across the spectrum. I mean, it's just fantastic. And you've allowed yourself to be laid hold of, and God is using you powerfully and being recognized. And, tell us just as we draw stumps here, what was the deal on the Metro? How did you get picked up there?
There was a call out for women in business. That was all around International Women's Day. So it was a great opportunity. Women in business that were wanting to make a change in society. So that was a really great article. Actually, at the time, I had a PR firm and they just presented my story to the Metro and they were compelled by it. So that was a real coup for us. I was very excited about that.
Wonderful. And you quote a verse that I've learned the hard way as well. Many are the plans in a man or woman's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose which prevails. Give us your final words.
And so, particularly in the world of business, where you're being asked to make a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan, daily plan, weekly plan, I've really had to learn to dance the tightrope of that. I do believe that God gives us gifts and skills to plan and be strategists. But I have also learned year after year after year that God has a plan for my life. God has a very definite plan for this business. And there are things that I just couldn't have even banked on. There are clients that have come our way that I wouldn't have even punted for in a million years. That there are pathways that God is nudging us down that serve his purpose, his kingdom purpose, way more than what would be my lovely end goal, sitting on a sun lounger in Barbados, drinking margaritas and rum punches. And then actually treading God's way. It leads to joy. It leads to fulfillment. It's the path of uncomfortable ease is the best word that I can say. But, it's the path that helps me know that when I face God at the end of my time, I will know that I was obedient and I did what he asked.
Yeah. Yeah, well, keep it up. We'll be cheering you on. You know, I was actually preaching at St. Mark's Battersea, so just down the road from where you would have spent your childhood a couple of weeks ago. And I quoted Edmund Burke's famous line, all that it takes for evil to prosper is for good people to do nothing. So listen, all you guys in this podcast, please, let's not be good people doing nothing. Find something to get angry about, pick a fight, and let's be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Let's not be spectators. Let's engage. Let's use our talents, our passions, our giftings to be shapers of different industries, as Antoinette is doing it in the cleaning industry. And Antoinette, before we go, how can people be in touch with you?
I'm across all of the socials, so you can find me on Facebook, Antoinette Daniel. You can find me on Twitter, Antoinette Daniel JH, YouTube, LinkedIn. It's got my photo there, so that'll be an easy one to find me on. And if you just look at my business, Just Helpers, you can contact me through there as well. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk to you about any of these issues. And if you've got any know-how in the tax, the employment laws or campaigning laws, I'd definitely love to talk to you too.
Wonderful. Would you guys respond to that? If you're interested, do get in touch, Antoinette. We'll put all your stuff in the blurb underneath the podcast so that people can do that. Antoinette, thank you so much for being with us. God bless you loads. I'm so grateful that you've given us your time.
Oh, amen. It was such a pleasure. Thanks, Simon.
Brilliant. Thank you. So everybody, it's been another fantastic week, hasn't it? Next week, we've got a fantastic guest again. And I'd love to see you then. Please give us a 5-star review on iTunes. You can be in touch with me on simongilbo.com or the various social media platforms. Get other people to sign up. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Toodaloo.